What's going on, guys? Meteorologist Jonathan Kegas back with you for another edition of Tropics Watch live on New 6 Plus, the Just Weather YouTube channel, WKMG YouTube channel, and of course on clickorlando.com. Hope everybody's doing well. Post in the comments where you're tuning in from on this fine Labor Day Monday where we do not have any threats. It's a rarity that I feel like where we don't have any threats to any landmass from a tropical system that has a name on Labor Day. It's a pretty rare feat these days, but we're going to get into some of the reasons why. I'm going to switch back to my other weather computer now, to my other source. Just bear with me for 1 second, and we are going to get into it all. Again, if you have any questions, post those in there. We're going to be talking about that as well down the line. What you just saw there was the tropical fuel, and we're going to touch on that a little bit later on into the show. All right, so one of the couple of things here that I do want to touch on, kind of a disclaimer. From what I talk about in terms of why it is quote-unquote quiet for the peak of hurricane season and why, certainly at least from a forecast perspective in terms of the number of names, we're likely not going to reach certainly the upper end of some of the bigger ranges that we had earlier in the season. But nonetheless, we are going to get all into that over the next 20 to 30 minutes that we're hanging out together. First things first, we do have two areas highlighted by the National Hurricane Center. So that's these two orange blobs. We have this 40% shot for development here to the west of Jamaica into the Yucatan Peninsula, also into Cuba. To the south of Cuba, and then into the Bay of Campeche. And then we have this other 40% area over the next 7 days. It's going to be east of the Cabo Verde Island. So I want to show you the satellite perspective of these tropical waves. And the one off of Africa certainly looks a little healthier. This is one of the more healthy tropical waves that we have seen in quite some time. Just to kind of let the cat out of the bag a little bit with the main reason for this, it looks like the Atlantic is having stability issues. And again, kind of disclaimer, this is a good thing for humans. So we're just talking about why it's so quiet. I know there's a lot of questions out there. I've seen it all over social media and stuff, but we're going to be talking about that as well. But again, the disclaimer, there's a lot of hurricane season left to go. It only takes one. You know that saying. And again, I am not saying that hurricane season is over. There is a long way to go, and I think there might be a delayed peak. And again, we're going to get into all that in just 1 second. First, though, I do want to look at what's going on here with these waves. We have wave number one that is showing signs of at least a little bit of thunderstorm activity. It has really been struggling for a lot of its life. And again, a good thing. And then as we're going to go back here, here is our secondary wave. Certainly it looks much more like a tropical wave. And it came off of Africa pretty far south, a sign that the intertropical convergence zone is shifting back to the south. If you're with us 2 weeks ago during our last Tropics Watch live session, we were talking about how one of the reasons why it had been a quiet August was because that convergent zone where you have the trade winds coming out of the northeast through the northern part of Africa and then the wind coming out of the southern hemisphere, they collide, they send up thunderstorms and extra cloud cover. But by and large, we have seen that way far north. If you've been keeping up with some of the world headlines, there has been a lot of rain through the Sahara Desert. That is super, super rare. And that's the byproduct of that intertropical convergence zone being far north and those tropical waves moving off into Africa super far north as well. The environment's not as favorable up here as it would be where this wave is there. The water is cooler. There's more dry, dusty air from the Sahara Desert up in those parts, and it's harder for those tropical waves to recover. So that's kind of the thing that was holding things back through August, at least one of the reasons for that. We'll talk about some of the other reasons and really get in depth in just a couple of minutes. First of all, I want to show you where those things could be going. So this is going to be the upper level pattern. And what we're looking for here is some of the low level spin. So this area right out here where you see my mouse, that's that area, that's that secondary area that's closer to Africa. So it's trying to spin something up there. This is the GFS pattern. And then here finally, by the time we get to Jamaica, it still looks like it's a kind of an open wave here with the surface pressure lines that I have overlaid on top here. But there it is right there where you see that yellow pop up. So still, thankfully, not very strong. And you see it kind of spiral and then move towards Central America. And then this goes out until Friday and then until where it stops. I want to go back before we talk about the where we stand part. I know the one thing that I saw this week has been the one thing that I've seen a lot of this week are those crazy model runs that show a monster hurricane in the Gulf and then it backs off and then it doesn't show anything, or those ensembles. It's important to note how to interpret the models rather than just plastering them on social media. If you have followed me and Channel 6 for quite some time, then you know what I'm talking about, that I don't like that stuff because you need to have context with it. In order for that behemoth fantasy storm from those models to just erupt in the Gulf, our storm right now, that wave in the Eastern Caribbean, would really have to start gaining some traction as we speak now, because a stronger storm has the better opportunity to lift north through the Gulf of Mexico, while a weaker system will take longer to consolidate, of course, which would keep it lower into the Western Caribbean and into the Western Gulf of Mexico. So really by this point, I think the Eastern Gulf is really out for any kind of possibility here. Mississippi, maybe Alabama, or Alabama, maybe Mississippi, and then Florida. But I think Texas, if it would to get its act together, would still be in play, kind of like a Barrow solution. Of course, Barrow was not going to be as strong as that, but nonetheless, that's really what we are looking at there. So it's important to note that when you see these models plastered everywhere without context, to not freak out. Okay, so promise me that, because there's been a lot of that over the last week when it comes to the wave that really looks like crud. And again, that is a good thing. And there it is right there. There's limited shower and thunderstorm activity with it at this point. And that is why the Hurricane Center, quote unquote, only has it as a 40% shot for development. Now, when it gets out into that area, to around Jamaica and into the Western Caribbean, that is where it's going to have the opportunity to become a tropical depression over the next couple of days. So we are going to be watching that. All right, so I'm going to check the feed to make sure that we don't have any questions before we go forward here. And let's just check this out. Let's see. I need to bring up my social media thing so I can pull some comments over. All right, here we go. Okay, so this is the thing here. So, Gabriel, we're going to kind of put that to rest. It's another year. Hurricanes are going to destroy the earth, as he puts. Another very slow season. So, it's really not. It's a slower season right now. Okay, so that's the point that I want to make here. But here's the thing. Last year was supposed to be a slow season, and it wasn't. It was way above average for an El Nino year. So it's not every year that it's forecast to be above average. Last year was actually going to be below average, and it ended up being above. We're going to get into some of the reasons why it is below normal coming up in just a couple of minutes. But, yeah, that's not the whole point. And that's the thing, and this is going to be kind of the believe it when I see it thing, Rodney, going forward, because it's there, and the 18Z, if anything, really can't be trusted. There's no upper air data going into the 18Z unless there's hurricane hunters, and there's none of that going on right now. So the 18Z run is really, that's the fantasy, what we call it, where it's just friends don't let friends use the 18Z GFS. Let's just put it that way, okay? So you really can't bank on that. Not exactly true. Not exactly true. And exactly, and this is the same thing that we were kind of talking about before. And if you signed up for the Tropics Watch newsletter, you got that in your inbox a couple of hours ago. The one thing that I really, really want to highlight is it only takes one, and we are still only in the early stages of September. So it's like that fat lady hasn't sung yet going forward. And I preface this all by saying this is all great news that we're not going gangbusters with the season just yet. Just reading some comments here, and then we're going to get back to it. Just making sure that I'm getting everybody. All right, so now we're going to move forward here, kind of like the where we stand and all that jazz, because it's kind of telling it, and it kind of shows that it's not over yet, but we are running behind schedule. And Gerardo, we are going to get into that as well. Sorry, I can't walk and chew gum. Just I saw some other questions come into to the chat, and I was just reading them before we went forward. I'm going to go back to my other weather computer as we speak. Switching that source right now and going to the graph, which I show every week because I always like to go kind of the you are here way. So this is the climatology. Now, the quote-unquote peak of hurricane season, the actual climatological peak is September 10th. The peak season is really from August 20th through about October 15th. That's when we climatologically see the most hurricane activity. Hurricane season officially ends on November 30th. One of the things that I wanted to show you was kind of, again, the names here. We've gone through 5, so now we're starting to run a little bit behind schedule when it comes to where we should be. We should be through the F storm if we're following an average season. So we are a little bit behind schedule. We are certainly behind schedule of the National Hurricane Center forecast and a bunch of others. And this leads me to my next little tangent rant. Just because the forecast isn't working out, quote unquote, doesn't mean it was hype from those entities that forecast that. That's one of my biggest pet peeves there. Those are some of the most respected meteorologists and scientists and forecast entities that do put this stuff out. More often than not, it is correct. The last few years have been correct. Again, last year it was a little too quiet, but nonetheless, it's not hype. It's not scare tactics. Insurance is not going to go up unless you get hit. Okay, so it's not that they're out there trying to raise insurance rates. Those guys live in Florida too. So want to be clear about that. But here's where we are right now. We're through the E storm, so that's 5 storms. So this is where we should be, quote unquote, as we stand right now. So the 6th named storm typically develops on August 29th. So we haven't seen that yet. So we are about 4-ish days behind that. We typically get the 3rd hurricane on September 7th. So we haven't seen the 3rd hurricane yet. We've gone through 2. So we do get a hurricane between now and September 7th. It'll be on schedule. I don't think that that's going to happen. So we're going to be behind on that front as well. And then the 2nd major hurricane typically doesn't develop until we get to September 19th. That's whenever we've already seen one major, of course, that was way back when Beryl was around. And we haven't had one since. Again, thankfully, that's all good news. It is all good news. So that's kind of where we stand. I'm going to go back to the comments just to see what we're checking at. I believe coming up, Hurricane Dorian was just a touch after Labor Day. But it is the 5-year anniversary. All right, so now we're going to get to Gerardo's question here, because this is what the meaning of this, and again, it's not an excuse by any means. It's science. It is meteorology. It's all that stuff. And whenever something happens, you investigate it. When it doesn't happen, you investigate it, kind of like a post-mortem. And again, to be clear, this is not the end of the season just yet. This is just what has kept us on the slower side at this point. And there are 3 main things here that has kept us on the slower side. Number 1, it has early on through July and August, it was the Saharan dust. We had the peak of the Saharan dust much, much later than what we would typically see it. So that dry, dusty air was around. So that was number 1. Number 2, we kind of talked about that earlier in the show. That was all because of the tropical waves emerging off of Africa so far north into the cooler Atlantic waters that are on the northern coast of Africa, and that dry, dusty air. The third reason, if I can count, is potentially the biggest reason of all. It's the lack of instability. And for those that know instability, you need to have colder air on top of warmer air to get thunderstorms to grow. We're just not seeing that. We have a very, very warm Atlantic Ocean right now, record warm in some cases. But we have an extremely warm upper atmosphere as well. So we have some things trying to get that convection going, but it just is not sustained because the upper atmosphere is very warm as well. So we just have the lack of instability. That's one of the reasons why, and potentially the main reason why, for this quiet peak season at this point. So it's something we're going to watch. I had a couple of questions about this on Facebook. Jonathan Kegas News 6, by the way, if you want to hit me up over there. I'm super responsive over there, and of course in the comment section here. But I think there's going to be an opportunity. We'll see this. So this is going to be kind of like the homework assignment, kind of the observation as we move forward for the rest of hurricane season. Will we see a delayed peak? Now, we have those 2 systems out there now, but what I mean by delayed peak is the water cools much, much slower than the land. Okay, so when we get the seasons changing and we start to cool the upper atmosphere a little bit, we're going to keep that water temperature super warm. So now we might be able to kind of displace the peak of hurricane season a little bit. So it's been super quiet because of the lack of instability, one of the reasons anyway. But we might be getting that opportunity anyway to get more instability later in the season because we have crazy warm water, and we're eventually going to cool the upper levels of the atmosphere as we get deeper into summer and then fall in a couple of weeks or a few weeks and naturally cool some things up. So that is really the 2 things that we're going to be watching going forward. Is that going to happen? It's a question. It's going to be interesting to see if it does, but that is in the realm of possibilities to get that through. Yep, and Rodney hit this on the head as well, and it's kind of like in 2020 where we had those major hurricanes through November. And if you were with us earlier in the season, while it may start to shut down a little bit for the eastern Gulf Coast, because if anybody's watching this from where the cold front has come through, like the Great Lakes, Northeast, it's kind of chilly up there. It feels pretty good. But the real thing is that the big thing is once we have those cold fronts coming down, it is harder for those storms to hit land on the East Coast because it does kind of steer them away a little bit. So that's one of the things that we are really going to have to watch going forward. And we actually did show that some of the long-range models showed drier than normal air sneaking down mid-September on through the North Gulf Coast and into Florida. If you were with us early in the season and before the season, when we did our forecast, we talked about that the hurricane season may shut off by the middle of September for Florida. Again, that's not a forecast, but that's one of the things that we were looking for, so to speak, in the month of September and into October. But with that said, the Western Gulf and the Caribbean may still be able to continue rolling right on through October and into November. Daniel asked a really good question. Is this a climate thing we are seeing or just a quirk in the normal weather patterns? It's a climate thing, and it is because of climate change that we are warming the upper levels of the atmosphere. Somebody brought up about that volcanic eruption. It did put excess water vapor into the atmosphere, but some of the experts that have been working on this have called that negligible to the warming. But it's still being studied from that. If anyone remembers that crazy eruption a couple of years ago now, it was just nuts. So that's what we have going on there. So those are the three reasons why that we have a relatively quiet hurricane season, peak season anyway. It wasn't so quiet in June. We had Cat 5 Beryl coming to town. All right, so what I want to show you now is this, and this is kind of into the fact. Let me get my dabber out, and we can show the crazy warm water temperatures in the upper 80s through most of the main development region, which is the area in between the Lesser Antilles and the Cabo Verde Islands, and then, of course, into the Caribbean. So if anything got in there, you'd really be looking for some big-time issues. And we do have a tropical wave in there, but again, you really can't take advantage, thankfully, of the warmer water unless you have something developed and you have that eye feature start to come through and all of that jazz and all of that. So that's going to be something to really watch over the next, again, couple of weeks into couple of months to see if we get that change. And hopefully that doesn't happen. And hopefully, we talked about this weeks ago, that we get a crazy bust. I love that. I'll be the first to admit that. I hope so. Here are the water temperature anomalies, and I wanted to talk about this too because this is going around social media, and then we'll kind of leave it here for this Monday's edition of Tropics Watch Live. Really, the opportunity, that notion of the Atlantic is cooling at a rapid pace, and scientists don't know why. You can clearly see here all the beet red across the Atlantic. The Atlantic is not cooling. What is cooling is this South Atlantic piece right here, where you see the blues and whites starting to pop up. That's that Atlantic Niña or Niño thing that you hear popping up. It develops similar to that of El Nino or La Nina, with the stronger winds blowing and to get the outblowing to come up. But it's not as widespread as the impacts from an El Nino or a La Nina. So keep that in mind, too, that the Atlantic is not cooling. It's just this little strip right here that is starting to cool. Just a little bit. And let me get back to any questions that we have. Pulling up the social media chart. Stand by so I can pull this over. I'm looking at the MJO stuff right now. I mean, here is the CFSV2 rendition of that. Now you're looking at the green. So this is going to be there's where we are kind of through the middle of September. And then we do have a little pulse coming through. This is going to be through the end of September and then into the first part of October. And then we have the sinking phase coming back on through. So that's where we kind of stand with that. It looks like it might come back around again and help to enhance things. And for those that don't know, the MJO, it has a role. It has kind of shut down. It looked like it was going to come through in the middle of August, but it kind of fell apart from really firing up all those Pacific storms. Remember, we were talking 2 weeks ago, we had 4 simultaneous storms in the Eastern Pacific, and then the MJO kind of fell apart as it was moving through the Atlantic Basin again, thankfully. So there was also that. That also kind of prevented things from really all that stuff as well. No, it is. Oh, you can see the comments. That's what I'm looking at. That's what I'm kind of watching over. No, Ronnie, it is. It's a double-edged sword. It really is, because that's all the things that are going to have to be. That's all the things there that we're talking about going forward, and things that will have to be studied in more detail. But there's no question that a warmer upper atmosphere is going to limit instability. So we have all of this fuel for the storms, but we have all the fuel for the storms. But if you're not getting the thunderstorms to take advantage of that, then you just have kind of put it to, this is the analogy I'll make here. It's kind of like gasoline just hanging out on the ground, and you throw an unlit match to it. Well, nothing's going to happen because the match isn't lit. But obviously, if you put that, strike that match and you get it going and throw it on the gasoline, then you have a nice big fire. So you can warm the atmosphere, and warm the ocean, but it's kind of that, it's counter. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but that's exactly what's happening, because you need to have a cool atmosphere, upper atmosphere, to get the thunderstorms to grow. Oh, yes. Okay. Yes, I am super, super excited to be forecasting with David, and to be doing live streams with David, and to have him join the team. It's going to be awesome. I am super excited. He is a great guy. I'm glad a lot of you guys on the chat know him already. You know how cool he is, and how great he is. A great, great guy. So I am super excited about that. Yes, tomorrow is his first official day. It's going to be great. Hey, Michael. Super excited about that as well. So I hope we can bring you a lot of live streaming coverage for the rest of hurricane season and beyond. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. A lot of people. Excellent. Excellent. I don't know if he's on the live chat tonight. He was on the last couple. But if he is, I hope we can bring a lot of live coverage, and we will, and all that stuff. And this is what people forget, too. It's like just kind of squirrel and transition back to something else. One of the things here, Beryl was quote unquote just a Cat 1. It was one of those crazy things that we always talk about, that, yeah, it's just we don't pay attention to the category. That thing was nuts going through. And when you're putting 80 to 100 mile per hour wind gusts in a very populated area, certainly with skyscrapers, it does a lot of damage. It does a lot of damage. And I'm sorry you guys are still dealing with the after effects there of Beryl. Yet we 100% are talking about Nazario. So that's fantastic that you guys know him. I'm so excited to welcome him to the team tomorrow. And there's going to be a lot of online coverage about the weather in Florida and beyond. So all that stuff. Awesome, William. Thanks so much. 1,000,000%. Couldn't say it better myself, and I hope that you guys recover quickly. This is a good question, Alyssa. So the last update from NOAA comes through right at the beginning of August, and then they don't update it again. I would be very interested to see if they did have, and they don't have another one coming out. But I'd be very interested to see if in fact, if they did have another one coming through, if they would change their predictions now. And I would imagine yes. I know, that was rough. That was rough. Alrighty, guys. Hey, thank you so much.